The story of Led Zeppelin begins in the ashes of another great band. The Yardbirds were winding down in 1968. Guitarist Jimmy Page was the last man standing. He had a tour to finish, so he needed to build a new band. He started by looking for a singer. His first choice was a man named Terry Reid, but Reid suggested someone else. He recommended a young, powerful singer from the Midlands. His name was Robert Plant. Page went to see Plant perform. He was immediately impressed by Plant's raw, bluesy voice. He knew he had found his front man. This was the first piece of the puzzle falling into place. Robert Plant then suggested a drummer he knew. This drummer was John Bonham. They had played together in a group called Band of Joy. Page and his manager, Peter Grant, went to see Bonham play. They were blown away. Bonham's drumming was unlike anything they had ever heard. It was loud, powerful, and incredibly groovy. He hit the drums with such force and precision. They knew they had to have him. Bonham was hesitant at first. He had other offers, but Page and Grant were persistent. They eventually convinced him to join what they were calling the New Yardbirds. The rhythm section was now locked in. The final piece was the bass player. Page knew exactly who he wanted. He called upon John Paul Jones. Jones was a well-respected session musician in London. He had worked on countless records. He played bass, keyboards, and arranged music for artists like the Rolling Stones and Dusty Springfield. He heard about Page's new project and wanted in. He contacted Page directly. With Jones on board, the lineup was complete. The chemistry between these four musicians was instant. Each member was a virtuoso in their own right. Together, they were something else entirely. They were a musical force of nature. The name, the New Yardbirds, didn't last long. There's a famous story about how they got their permanent name. Keith Moon, the drummer for The Who, had joked about a supergroup with Page. He said it would go down like a lead balloon. The band remembered this joke. They decided to adopt the name. They changed lead to Led to avoid mispronunciation. They swapped balloon for Zeppelin to add a sense of power and scale. And so Led Zeppelin was born. In late 1968, these four men entered the studio. They were about to change the course of rock music forever. Led Zeppelin released their first album in January 1969. It was simply titled Led Zeppelin. It was a seismic event in the world of music. The album was a raw and powerful statement. It blended heavy blues riffs with acoustic folk passages. Page's guitar work was phenomenal, Plant's vocals were otherworldly, and the rhythm section of Jones and Bonham was a thunderous foundation. Tracks like Good Times, Bad Times and Communication Breakdown were short, sharp shocks of rock and roll. But then you had Babe, I'm Gonna Leave You, which showed their dynamic range. And of course there was Dazed and Confused, a psychedelic blues epic that became a live staple. The band didn't waste any time. Their second album, Led Zeppelin II, came out later that same year. They recorded it while on tour in America. This album was even heavier and more direct. It's often considered the blueprint for heavy metal. The opening track, Whole Lotta Love, is one of the most iconic rock songs ever recorded. The riff is legendary. The middle section is a wild, experimental soundscape. The album also featured heavy hitters like Heartbreaker and the drum solo showcase, Moby Dick. Led Zeppelin were not just a successful band. They were becoming the biggest band in the world, defining the sound of the 1970s. Their third album, Led Zeppelin III, that was 1970, surprised everyone. After the heavy assault of the first two records, they took a different turn. Much of the album was acoustic. It was written at a remote cottage in Wales called Bronwy O'r. This showed their folk and Celtic influences. Songs like Tangerine and That's the Way were beautiful and gentle, but the album still had its heavy moments. Immigrant Song is a ferocious opener, a Viking battle cry set to music. This album proved that Led Zeppelin could not be put in a box. They were masters of both light and shade, acoustic and electric. Then came their fourth album. Released in 1971, it was officially untitled. Fans call it Led Zeppelin IV. This is arguably their masterpiece. It's one of the best-selling albums of all time. It contains so many of their most famous songs. You have the hard rock stomp of Black Dog and Rock and Roll. There's the mystical folk of The Battle of Evermore. And then there is Stairway to Heaven. This 8-minute epic became an anthem for a generation. It starts as a quiet acoustic piece and builds into a massive rock crescendo. It perfectly encapsulates everything that made Led Zeppelin great. It is a true monument of music. Led Zeppelin continued their global domination throughout the 1970s. Albums like Houses of the Holy from 1973 and Physical Graffiti in 1975 saw them experimenting even further. They explored funk, reggae and orchestral arrangements. They were playing to sold-out stadiums across the world. They were the biggest band on the planet, living a life of excess and incredible musical creativity. Their live shows were legendary, often lasting for over 3 hours. They were at the absolute peak of their powers. But the high life of rock and roll royalty came with its own set of dangers and pressures. The band was beginning to show signs of strain. Tragedy first struck the band in 1977. Robert Plant's 5-year-old son, Carrick, died suddenly from a stomach infection. The band was on tour in North America at the time. They immediately cancelled the rest of the tour. The loss was devastating for Plant. He considered quitting music altogether. The band went on hiatus. For a while it was uncertain if they would ever return. It was a dark and difficult time. The tight-knit unit that had conquered the world was now fractured by grief. The future of Led Zeppelin was in serious doubt. It took a long time for them to even consider playing together again. Eventually the band did reconvene. They recorded what would be their final studio album, In Through the Outdoor, released in 1979. It was a very different album. John Paul Jones and Robert Plant were the main creative forces. Jimmy Page and John Bonham were struggling with their own personal demons at the time. The album had a more keyboard-heavy, polished sound. Despite the turmoil, it was a huge commercial success. The band even headlined the Nebworth Festival in England in 1979. It seemed like they might have found a way to move forward, but more final tragedy was just around the corner. On September 25, 1980, the music stopped. John Bonham died at the age of 32. He had been drinking heavily during rehearsals for an upcoming tour. He passed away in his sleep. The loss of their friend and drummer was a blow from which the band could not recover. Bonham was the engine of Led Zeppelin. His drumming was irreplaceable. On December 4, 1980, the remaining members issued a statement. They announced that they could not continue as Led Zeppelin without him. The greatest rock and roll band in the world was over. It was the end of an incredible 12-year journey that had changed music forever. From their very beginning, Led Zeppelin's music was deeply rooted in the blues. Jimmy Page and Robert Plant were huge fans of American blues artists. People like Willie Dixon, Howlin' Wolf, and Muddy Waters were their heroes. They frequently incorporated blues standards into their live shows. They also used blues structures and lyrics as a foundation for their own songs. On their first album, You Shook Me and I Can't Quit You Baby were both covers of Willie Dixon's songs. They credited him for these. However, this is where the lines began to blur, leading to a controversy that has followed the band for decades. The issue arose with songs that were heavily based on older blues tracks, but without proper credit. A famous example is Whole Lotta Love. The lyrics and vocal melody are very similar to a song called You Need Love, written by Willie Dixon and recorded by Muddy Waters. Led Zeppelin did not originally credit Dixon. This led to a lawsuit in the 1980s, which was settled out of court. Dixon's name was then added to the credits. This was not an isolated incident. The main riff from the Lemon Song is almost identical to Howlin' Wolf's Killing Floor. After legal threats, that song's credit was also updated. Another major case involves Dazed and Confused. The song was a centerpiece of their live shows, but a singer-songwriter named Jake Holmes had recorded a song with the same title and a very similar structure in 1967. The Yardbirds, with Jimmy Page, had even opened for Holmes. Page adapted the song, wrote new lyrics, and made it his own epic creation. For years, only Page was credited. In 2010, Holmes filed a lawsuit. The matter was settled, and the credit on recent releases now reads, by Jimmy Page, inspired by Jake Holmes. This shows a pattern of borrowing that went beyond simple influence. So how do we look at this today? There's no doubt that the band took ideas, riffs and lyrics from other artists, particularly from the blues tradition. In the 1960s and 70s, this was more common. It was part of the folk and blues process to reinterpret old songs. However, Led Zeppelin became global superstars. They made millions of pounds from these songs. The original artists, many of whom were African-American bluesmen, often received nothing. While Zeppelin transformed these ideas into something new and powerful, the issue of credit and compensation remains a complicated part of their legacy. It's a difficult but important conversation to have. Jimmy Page was not just a brilliant guitarist, he was a master of the recording studio. He produced all of Led Zeppelin's albums, and he always had a clear vision for their sound. A huge part of that sound, honestly, came from his choice of guitars. His most famous guitar is the 1959 Gibson Les Paul Standard. He actually had two of them, which he called Number 1 and Number 2. Number 1 was his main guitar for most of his career, and its powerful humbucker pickups were just perfect for those heavy, sustained riffs. He also famously used our 1959 Fender Telecaster on the first album. That's the guitar you hear on the solo for Stairway to Heaven. Page used a variety of other guitars for different textures. He had a Dane Electro 3021, which was a cheaper guitar with lipstick pickups. It had a unique, thin and twangy sound. He used it for Kashmir and In My Time of Dying. For acoustic work, he often used a Martin D28. This guitar is all over Led Zeppelin 3 and the acoustic sections of Stairway to Heaven. He also used a Gibson EDS 1275 double-neck guitar. This allowed him to play the 12-string and 6-string parts of Stairway to Heaven Live without switching guitars, and it became one of his most iconic instruments. When it came to amplifiers, Page was surprisingly simple in the early days. For the first album, he often used a small Supro Coronado combo amp. This is actually a key part of that early sound. By using a small amp and turning it up loud, he could get a rich, saturated distortion. He was a pioneer of distant miking, placing a microphone far away from the amp in a large room. This captured the room's natural reverberation, and it's a huge reason why the drums and guitars on those records sound so massive. Later on, he used more powerful Marshall amps, typically a 100-watt Marshall SLP 1959 Plexi for a bigger, more aggressive tone. Page's use of effects was subtle, but honestly genius. He wasn't a guy with the huge pedal board. One of his signature effects was the wah-wah pedal, a Vox V846. You can hear it used brilliantly on Whole Lotta Love. He also used a Solar Sound Tone Bender fuzz pedal for extra grit and distortion on the early records. Another key part of his sound was the Echoplex EP3 tape delay unit. This created the echo and slapback effects you hear on so many tracks. And of course there was his use of a violin bow on the guitar. It created these eerie, swelling sounds, most famously on Dazed and Confused. It was this combination of gear and studio innovation that made him a true sonic architect. No story about Led Zeppelin is complete without talking about their manager, Peter Grant. He was a physically imposing figure, a former wrestler and doorman. But you know, he was much more than just a tough guy. He was fiercely protective of his band. He is often called the fifth member of Led Zeppelin. Grant completely changed the music business. Before him, the power was with the promoters and the record labels. The artist often got a very small percentage of the money they generated. Grant flipped that model on its head. He believed the band should be the ones making the real money from their success. Grant's approach to touring was revolutionary. At the time, bands would get maybe 50 or 60% of the ticket sales from a concert. Grant went to the promoters and demanded 90%. They were shocked. But Led Zeppelin was so popular that the promoters had no choice but to agree. Grant understood that the band was the main attraction. He made sure they were paid like it. He also fought against bootleggers. If he saw someone in the audience with recording equipment, he would personally go and confiscate it. There are stories of him destroying bootleg records with his bare hands in record shops. He was absolutely dedicated to protecting the band's music and income. One famous story illustrates his loyalty perfectly. During a concert in Oakland in 1977, a member of the promoter's staff allegedly slapped Grant's young son. A huge brawl erupted backstage involving Grant, John Bonham and the band's security team. Grant and others were arrested. The incident became a major news story. While the violence was regrettable, the story shows how far Grant would go to protect his own and the band's family. He was a father figure to them. He managed their career, but he also looked after them personally. He created a protective bubble around the band, allowing them to focus on their music. Peter Grant also pioneered the idea of album-oriented rock. In the UK, it was common for bands to release singles from their albums. Grant and the band decided against this. They wanted people to experience their albums as a complete work of art. They never officially released Stairway to Heaven as a single. This made fans even more eager to buy the albums. He also secured them one of the highest royalty rates in the industry from Atlantic Records. He was a brilliant, tough, and innovative manager. His strategies helped make Led Zeppelin the biggest and wealthiest band in the world. He truly was a giant of the music industry. After their split in 1980, the world clamored for a Led Zeppelin reunion. The first major opportunity came in 1985. It was for the Live Aid charity concert. The surviving members, Page, Plant and Jones, agreed to perform. They had two drummers filling in for John Bonham, Phil Collins and Tony Thompson. The anticipation was immense. This was going to be a historic moment. The band was scheduled to play at the JFK Stadium in Philadelphia. But the performance, unfortunately, is remembered as a disaster. It was a stark reminder of how essential Bonham's drumming was to their sound. There were many problems with the Live Aid set. The band had very little time to rehearse together. Page's guitar was apparently out of tune for much of the performance. Plant's voice was hoarse. The two drummers, both brilliant in their own right, couldn't quite lock into the classic Zeppelin groove. It was messy and under-rehearsed. The band themselves were deeply unhappy with it. They have since blocked it from being included on the official Live Aid DVD releases. It was a sad moment for fans who had hoped to see the return of their heroes. It showed that the magic couldn't just be switched back on. Another reunion happened in 1988. This was for the Atlantic Records' 40th anniversary concert. This time they had John Bonham's son, Jason Bonham, on drums. Jason had grown up around the band. He knew the songs inside and out. He played with the power and feel of his father. This performance was much better than Live Aid. The band seemed more comfortable. They played Kashmir, Heartbreaker and Whole Lotta Love. It felt more like Led Zeppelin. But it was still a one-off performance. Page and Plant would tour together in the 90s, but not under the Zeppelin name. A full reunion remained elusive. The true, glorious reunion finally happened in 2007. It was a tribute concert for the late record executive Ahmet Ertegun, held at the O2 Arena in London. Once again, Jason Bonham played drums. This time they rehearsed for weeks. They were determined to get it right, and they did. The concert was a phenomenal success. The band was on fire. They played a 2-hour set of their greatest songs. They sounded powerful, tight, and magical. Critics and fans raved about it. It proved that they could still perform at the highest level. The show was released as the concert film and album Celebration Day. It stands as a fitting final testament to their live power. Today is February 15th, 2026. Almost 46 years have passed since Led Zeppelin disbanded. Yet their music is more popular than ever. Their legacy is immense. They are consistently ranked as one of the greatest and most influential rock bands of all time. They laid the groundwork for heavy metal, hard rock, and alternative rock. You can hear their influence in countless bands, from Guns N' Roses to Greta Van Fleet, from Nirvana to the White Stripes. Their combination of power, mystique, musical virtuosity, and a songwriting craft has never been matched. They are true rock and roll royalty. In the modern era of streaming, Led Zeppelin are giants. On Spotify, they have over 33 million monthly listeners. That's an incredible number for a band that hasn't released a new song in over 40 years. Their top tracks each have hundreds of millions, and in some cases, over 1 billion streams. Stairway to Heaven has streamed over 1.3 billion times. Immigrant Song and Whole Lotta Love are not far behind. On YouTube, their official channel has millions of subscribers. Official videos and audio clips rack up huge view counts. This shows that new generations are constantly discovering their music. They are not just a band for people who grew up in the 70s. Album sales also tell the story. Led Zeppelin have sold an estimated 200 to 300 million records worldwide. They are one of the best-selling music artists in history. In the United States alone, they have sold over 112 million certified units, making them one of the top-selling acts of all time there. Even today, their classic albums continue to sell, both on vinyl and digitally. Their catalogue is a constant presence on sales charts. When they reissue their albums with new remastered audio, they often re-enter the main album charts, like the Billboard 200. This is a testament to the timeless quality of the recordings. While they don't have new songs hitting the charts, their music often finds its way back into the public consciousness. A song might be used in a popular film like Immigrant Song in Thor Ragnarok. This can cause a huge spike in streaming and sales. The song re-entered some rock charts around the world after that movie was released. Their music is part of the cultural fabric. It's on classic rock radio every day. It's in movies, TV shows, and commercials. The music of Led Zeppelin isn't a relic of the past. It is a living, breathing thing that continues to resonate with millions of people. Now we come to one of the most notorious stories in rock and roll history. It's a story that has become a legend. It's often used as the ultimate example of rock star depravity. This is the story of Led Zeppelin and the Shark. For years the story has been told and retold, getting more exaggerated each time. It has become a modern myth. But what really happened? The incident took place on July 28, 1969. The band was staying at the Edgewater Inn in Seattle, Washington. This hotel is famous because you can fish directly from the windows of your room. The story usually involves the band, a groupie, and a shark, or a mud shark, caught from the hotel window. The details of what supposedly happened are quite graphic and disturbing, involving the fish and the woman. For a long time, the story was attributed to the members of Led Zeppelin. It seemed to fit their reputation for wild, debauched behavior on the road. The tale was spread by roadies and other bands. It became part of the Led Zeppelin mythology. It was seen as the peak of their excess. But the truth is a bit different. The members of Led Zeppelin were present, but they were not the main participants. The incident did happen, but it was orchestrated by the band's road manager, Richard Cole, and the drummer from another band, Vanilla Fudge. That band was also on the tour. According to several accounts, including from Mark Stein of Vanilla Fudge and Richard Cole himself, they were the ones who engaged in the act with the groupie and a red snapper, not a shark. The members of Led Zeppelin were in the room and watched it happen. John Bonham was reportedly involved to some degree, but the main instigators were not Page, Plant, or Jones. The story got twisted over time, placing the blame entirely on Zeppelin. So, the infamous shark episode is a mix of fact and fiction. An incident involving a fish and a groupie did occur at the Edgewater Inn, but it wasn't a shark, and it wasn't led by the key members of Led Zeppelin, as the legend suggests. The story's endurance says a lot about the band's larger-than-life reputation. People were willing to believe they were capable of anything. It's a crazy story from a crazy time in music history. It serves as a cautionary tale about how myths are made. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this deep dive into the history of Led Zeppelin, please hit the like button and subscribe to the channel for more content like this.